Olá, boa noite. Já vamos começar, estamos começando às 7h15, como os veneráveis diriam aqui, horário latino de começar uma atividade. Queria avisar que vocês já devem estar cientes que o evento vai ser em inglês, vocês vão precisar do rádio antes de eu terminar para poder ouvir a tradução simultânea. Então, eu estou aqui representando a Casa de Dharma, que organizou essa palestra do Dhamma, né, do ensinamento do Buda, e que faz parte dessas atividades complementares do retiro anual que nós realizamos no Carnaval, e que conta com a presença desses monges que vêm a convite da Casa de Dharma para ministrar o retiro. A gente não tem uma sangha ou uma comunidade monástica Theravada budista estabelecida no Brasil, então nós dependemos desse convite, para eles estarem aqui. Então a primeira coisa que eu faço é agradecer aos veneráveis que estão ali atrás pela vinda, por aceitarem o convite. A gente fez de tudo para que a estadia deles no Brasil fosse a melhor possível. A gente tem que agradecer também, é muito importante agradecer a equipe organizadora da Casa de Dharma, que durante o ano passado, voluntariamente, desde o ano passado, voluntariamente e com muito esforço, organizando esse retiro e esses eventos para que eles pudessem ser possíveis. Então, muitos deles estão presentes aqui hoje. Nós estamos muito a agradecer a vocês que colaboraram para que a prática do Dhamma fosse divulgada e experienciada por todos que estão aqui. Para a Casa de Dharma é uma honra receber o Luang Sumedo. Daqui a pouco ele vai estar aqui, estou falando com eles ali escondidos atrás, mas o Luang Sumedo, o Luang Po, uma palavra em tailandês que é uma palavra carinhosa que seria pai, avô. Ele é um monge de muita importância, é uma honra ter ele aqui, e a gente considera essa ocasião um momento muito auspicioso para a prática e um marco na trajetória do budismo Theravada no Brasil. Então eu vou fazer uma breve apresentação deles antes deles surgirem atrás da cortina. O Luang Sumedo, também conhecido como Ajahn Sumedo, Ajahn agora com esse título de professor, como é a palavra em tailandês. Ele nasceu em 1934, ele foi para a Tailândia em 1966 para iniciar seu estudo da prática da meditação, e em 1967 se ordenou como monge, recebeu o título pleno de ordenação monástica. Após alguns anos de prática, ele encontrou um novo professor em um mosteiro da tradição da floresta. Esse professor foi Ajahn Chah, um grande mestre dessa tradição, que juntamente com outros professores excepcionais foi responsável por esse renascimento da tradição Theravada do budismo na Tailândia. Esses professores tinham como principal intuito elevar os padrões da prática budista, tendo como principal guia as regras monásticas inicialmente estabelecidas pelo Buda, esse conjunto denominado Vinaya. Então eles tinham essa ideia de seguir rigorosamente essas regras. Então o Luang Sumedo, após cerca de 10 anos aprendendo sendo instruído por esse professor, fez um grande ato, que foi o estabelecimento em 1975, sob a orientação do Ajahn Chah, de um monastério internacional da floresta, conhecido como Wat Pah Nanachat. Esse monastério, de maneira inédita, dava ensinamentos do Dhamma, instruções em inglês, teve assim um papel fundamental no estabelecimento de uma tradição monástica Theravada fora da Tailândia. Em seguida, ele também estabeleceu outros monastérios na Inglaterra, como por exemplo o conhecido Wat Amarawati. Então, hoje já existem vários países no Ocidente, em vários países mais 7 mosteiros que foram dentro dessa mesma tradição, que tiveram um pouco como mentor, na Suíça, na Itália, Austrália, Nova Zelândia, Estados Unidos. E isso dá para ter uma dimensão de como a comunidade monástica do Ocidente e como grupos de meditação leigos, que não contém monges, devem aos esforços e ensinamentos do Sumedo, de Luang Por, que atualmente vive retirado na Tailândia, onde ele iniciou sua prática monástica em 66. Então, eu gostaria só de brevemente também apresentar outros monges que estão acompanhando o Ampol, vão estar nessa mesa com ele hoje. O Ajahn Asoka, que é o atendente pessoal dele, que o acompanhou nessa vinda ao Brasil, né, e com muito esforço guiou a comunidade de leigos em como receber de maneira apropriada um monge tão sênior aqui no Brasil. Nós temos também o Ajahn Mudito, que ele é um paulistano, né, um monge Theravada brasileiro, que iniciou seus estudos na prática de meditação na casa de Dharma, inclusive, e em 2002 se ordenou no Wat Pah Nanacham. Hoje em dia ele tem ajudado a comunidade do Brasil com ensinamentos e com a tradução de importantes textos para o português. Temos também a presença do Ajahn D'Amico, que é um português de Portugal, que se ordenou em 2006 na Marwati, tendo Ajahn Sumedho como preceptor. Então, é isso, esses serão os veneráveis que estarão aqui conosco hoje. Ao final dessa sessão da palestra teremos perguntas e respostas para o público. E pedimos para vocês fiquem até o final, que nós temos um presente especial para vocês ainda, que é um livro publicado pela Marwati e traduzido pelo Ajahn Mudito, que contém ensinamentos de grandes mestres dessa tradição, e que é um presente da Paz para vocês. Esperamos que essas ações sejam úteis para todos os seres na superação do sofrimento, que todos os seres estejam seguros, felizes e que possam encontrar o caminho para a paz e libertação. Obrigado. Com licença, eu vou chamar.
Well, this evening I've been invited to give a talk on Dharma, and it sees many people interested here in Sao Paulo in the teachings of the Lord Buddha. And particular interest at this time because Buddhism is a very ancient religion. It dates back to 2,500 years ago. In India, and it was Buddhism has this unique take on the religious question because we're all interested in what's the purpose of our lives, what is it to be human, why is there suffering, why is there birth and death, how should we live our lives, and religions, all religions have different ways of approaching these kind of ultimate questions. And the Buddha addressed the problem of the human condition in a very direct way that still applies to modern life in modern societies. Because we think of an ancient religion, what's its value? What does it have to offer somebody in Sao Paulo or London or Bangkok at this time? And it's because even within the affluent world, within the successful stories of people's lives developing material wealth and security, there's still this human suffering. There's a suffering is a common bond we all share with each other. And this is what the Buddha established his first teaching on, the common reality of human suffering. And of course this is a unique religious approach, because suffering is ordinary. It's not necessarily like some terrible kind of suffering, even though that's included, but just the anxiety, the worry about the future, guilt and remorse about past actions, resentments, and the human condition in general, whether you're in affluent social position or poor. It applies to every human being that ever existed. Where other religions talk about the ultimate, the metaphysical realities, the Buddha addressed his comrades after his enlightenment. He went to find his 5 colleagues who he practiced various forms of meditation with before, and they were practicing asceticism, very hard practices, denial of desire, and kind of controlling the mental states. And before the Buddha was enlightened, he realized that this took you so far, but it didn't really resolve the problem of human suffering. There was still something missing, something lacking. He left his 5 colleagues, his 5 friends, and as generally it is believed, he sat under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya. And what is it that he realized to be an enlightened being, a Buddha? So we asked him, what is it, the difference between, say, an ordinary person and an enlightened one? So his first sermon, his first teaching to his 5 colleagues was about the 4 noble truths. And this is an exploration of suffering. And this exploration isn't about suffering that's caused from outside, but the suffering we create with our thinking mind, with our regrets, with our worries about the future, with our resentments and disappointments with ourselves, with the people we live with, our families, our society in general. And so this is like Buddhist meditation and the insight practices is taking suffering and examining it in a different way, rather than just trying to get rid of it, trying to blame it on others or something else. We begin to look at that feeling, that sensitivity, that feeling of dis-ease, unhappiness, depression, fear, envy, jealousy, greed in its various forms, aversion, confusion, so forth. These are the common human emotions. And the human form, when you look at yourself, you realize you're in a state of continuous sensitivity, that this realm that we're living in is a realm, a sense realm. And sensitivity means both pleasure and pain. You know, it's not, we'd like to have just pleasant sensory experiences, is what we want. And what we don't want are the unpleasant ones. But sensitivity means that we have to experience both in this form, the human form. And this human form is a totally sensitive form. You know, when you really contemplate your own existence, you know, from the time you're born, from your mother to the time you die, you're in this state of continuous sensitivity, sensory impingement. And how much control do you have over that? You know, how much can you control just to have the pleasant sensations without the unpleasant? Because they go together, and this realm is like this. So this is an awakening insight. Actually, it seems quite simple, but an insight into the reality of our existence is just being more aware of your own experience as you're experiencing life in the present moment. And so this emphasis on mindfulness, this English word that now is quite the word of the day when in countries like the UK or the United States, they're talking and everywhere else about mindfulness practices. Because mindfulness has never before been that important to us. It's the worldly values of success and status and wealth and material abundance and stability and good government, democracy and wealth, successful economies of all have been our aim, you know, to create a society in which we feel safe and secure, in which things are fair and just and democratic. And mindfulness in the past 20, 30 years has become a word that is quite significant. For example, in England, they find it, you know, a useful way of dealing with mental illness, with emotional swings, with problems, both in normal life or in personal problems. Because mindfulness is our ability. When we use this word mindfulness, it doesn't really make much sense exactly in the English translation. When it's taken from the ancient Pali language, which is Sati Sampajanya, which is, Sati means to recall the present moment, is like this. Like at this moment now, this is the way it is, you know, whether how you're feeling, whether you're feeling at ease or confused or interested or bored or whatever, you're feeling something right now, and mindfulness is our ability to recognize right now it's like this, and then also to include things. It's not just taking it in a personal way, but if we pick up the atmosphere, the conditions that are affecting our conscious state at this present moment is like this. So while we're sitting here in this theater, it's you know, it's a special situation that you've come to, and the feeling that you have right now, you can be aware of it. You're interested, or bored, or confused, or agree, or disagree, but you can only know what you're feeling at this present moment. Sati Sampajanya. And then the wisdom, the universal wisdom can operate through us, because it's through this awareness, this mindfulness, that we connect to universal reality, to universal wisdom. What we consider wisdom in the worldly sense is usually acquiring knowledge from outside ourselves. So we go to universities and study philosophy or psychology, science, and we learn all about what others have said or done, and we learn, you know, the wisdom of the sages of the past. So what we tend to see in terms of worldly wisdom is wisdom we acquire from outside or through experience in survival, right? If you say somebody's streetwise, meaning that they know how to survive in a cold-hearted society, how to get through a day without being murdered or abused. And so he develops survival mechanisms of street wisdom. But ultimate wisdom, universal wisdom, is available to us only through mindfulness. Because then we're making our conscious reality open to ultimate reality, to the reality that we're existing in, but we may not recognize it, we may not relate to it in any way. For one thing, we're very identified with the physical body that we have. This is, from the time you're born, your mother was taking care of you, this is, you're seen in terms of the physical appearance. Whether you're a boy or a girl, or you're easy to take care of, or troublesome, or your skin color, or your social status. One acquires a sense of oneself in terms of appearance, the physical body, the gender of the body, and then this develops a sense of separateness, because we're all different, in terms of appearance. And this separateness is where we acquire the ego, the sense of a self as some separate entity that separates us from each other. And this can take us into adulthood, into old age, and we may never see it in any other way, of really looking at life other than through this sense of I'm this physical body, I'm this age, I'm this gender, I'm this appearance. And of course this leads to a lot of suffering, because we tend to have ideals of what people, what beauty is, or what the acceptable appearance of someone. We don't fit into the categories that we adhere to, or our society approves of, and we feel even more isolated and left out and unwanted. This separateness also leads to loneliness, a sense of I'm on my own, and we suffer a lot from this sense of isolation, of lack of community, or being able to relate emotionally and fully with other human beings, because of these limitations that we acquire when we're just innocent children. Now this suffering then leads us to something like Buddhist meditation. In my own case, I became interested in Buddhism when I was in the American Navy in the 1950s, 1955. I came across Zen Buddhism in Japan. I was on a ship that was a supply vessel to the American bases in Japan. And Zen Buddhism was becoming quite, it was something that, especially in the West Coast of the United States, in the San Francisco Bay Area, there was a lot of interest amongst intellectuals in Zen, in the Zen approach. And the Zen approach is interesting because my own cultural conditioning was based on more or less absolutes of good and bad, right and wrong, where you try to interpret your life experience through these absolute moral judgments of this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. Heaven is like this, hell is what we don't want. And they become rather fixed in how we tend to interpret our own experience of life and the world around us through these very dualistic conditioning of the thinking process. And what interested me with Zen Buddhism at the time, as I, encountered it, was that it gave you options. Something could be good, it could be bad, it could be both good and bad, and it could be neither good nor bad. And you have these two other categories in which the absolute fixed view of good or bad is relative, is something that you can't judge everything by through absolute value judgments. And of course I was 21 at the time, sailor, but feeling a sense of, in the military, you know, it's a kind of meaningless life. And one didn't understand what the purpose of one's life is. And then you're living a life very based on a certain way of military thinking operates. And you knew that there had to be more to life than that. There'd be something better than a sailor's view of the world. And so this led me to this interest in Zen Buddhism. But before that, when I was 19 years old, only 19, I was was in the first year in the Navy. I had a kind of mystical experience where I was living in this kind of dreary shipyard in San Diego, California. And I became very fed up with life there. So I went off to a Christian monastery in Santa Barbara for a weekend. So I spent a weekend at a Christian monastery, beautiful place. Santa Barbara is a beautiful town. And the monastery was on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And before I was living in this dreary shipyard with all these old rusting World War II ships. And, why did I go into the military? You know, what drove me into this impulsive act of enlisting in the U.S. Navy? And it was during the Korean War time. So during this time, this weekend at this monastery, I was walking out in the hills, the sunshine. On Sunday evening I had to return to the naval base. And suddenly I began to just feel this, like the ego completely disappeared. And I felt this sense of oneness and a sense of bliss that I never felt before. And it wasn't due to any particular way of thinking, or it was certainly not not into drugs or anything like that. But just the sense of this separate, isolated self, a 19-year-old boys, you know, or in a transition stage, is a very difficult age for most of us. And you're still child, and you're expected to be a man, and you don't know what to do. But suddenly this confusion dropped away, and I don't know why, but at that moment I felt this sense of oneness or perfection or bliss, whatever it was. And I thought to myself, I wish I could be like this all the time. You know, this is how I want to be. And the actual feeling lasted for hours and until I returned to the naval base, and then it just stopped and back in where I was before. But of course, one developed. I didn't know what had happened to me. I had no knowledge of this state, and it was certainly never expected. So what was it? And then when I came across Zen Buddhism 2 years later, of course, I connected that this is probably what you have to do to be like that, to be free from the fear, the self-consciousness, the anxiety that one creates through the personality, through the ego, through the conditioning of the mind. So this led me eventually into, I left the Navy, finished university, and I was always interested in Asian culture. So I did a degree in Chinese civilization and then in Indian culture, a master's degree. And from there I was trying to connect more and more to Buddhism. And so, but when in 1963, I went into the Peace Corps as President Kennedy established it, and I was in the actual training, Peace Corps training in Hawaii when President Kennedy was assassinated. But I was sent to Southeast Asia, to Malaysia, to North Borneo, Sabah, the state of Sabah, as an English teacher. And of course that brought me into the Theravada Buddhist world, which is Thailand and Cambodia, Laos, Sri Lanka. And I'd never really studied the Theravada approach, but because I was actually living in Theravadan countries, I thought, well, might as well try to learn more about this approach. And I had a holiday in Thailand, 1964, Thailand and Cambodia, and I was so impressed by when we entered Thailand, the temples and the villages, the monks in orange robes on alms round, and stupas and chetties, and the whole country. You know, Thailand is about 95% Theravada Buddhists, including the king, and so it's one of the few countries left that is, really Buddhist through and through, and it's from the top to the bottom. And other religions are about 5%. There's not many. There's minority religions, but the majority are from the Theravada school of Buddhism. And so I thought, this is where I must come after I finish my contract with the Peace Corps to find a meditation teacher, because by this time I had studied Buddhism and read a lot, but this would inspire me, like the scriptures, the suttas, the Buddhist literature would inspire me, but it didn't seem to change me in any way. I still suffered from this sense of separateness, of loneliness, of self-disparagement, self-criticism. So, and I knew I wanted to find a way to put it into practice. So my aim when I went to live in Thailand was to find a teacher, and eventually found the famous one in Northeast Thailand, Ajahn Chah. And he was a master at Buddhist meditation. He really, by the time I met him, he had realized these noble truths himself. And so I spent the next 10 years with Ajahn Chah, near him, and he would send me off to various branch monasteries, but generally speaking, it was during this time that I actually began to understand through insight, through investigation, through the practice of meditation, where the transformation takes place, where I could see what I was doing to create this separateness all the time, the habit tendencies, the emotional habits I developed. I was 30, 31 at the time when I became a monk. So over these past 50 years, I've had opportunity to put it into practice, you see. Because I wasn't quite sure whether I could do it, you doubt yourself, or whether it really didn't work, whether it was just another interesting philosophical theory, or what it was. But Ajahn Chah's approach was very practical, very down to earth, and he also combined the monastic form as a vehicle to use. So when I first ordained as a monk, I didn't have any intention of spending my life as a Buddhist monk. I thought 2 years would be enough. By that time I'd probably know whether I wanted to, continue, whether I could do it or I couldn't do it. But 2 years passed, and this is 50 years now. So it's had a lifetime to apply the Buddhist teaching. And this application is like Munpa Cha or these Thai forest teachers always pointing to their heart, to this area. They say, stop looking outward, and trying to find peace and security out there, because you won't find it out there. It's through this inward looking. So they take their hand, they point to this area of their body. They're not pointing to themselves as personalities, but this is the direction that you look at. And then this is what mindfulness is. It's not judgmental. It's not about how you should feel, or it's not it's not self-criticism. It's awareness of what you're actually feeling. Because right now you can only feel the way you feel. Whether you like it or not, something else. But if you don't like the way you feel now, then you can be aware of that as another feeling. So the attention then is developing this consciousness with wisdom. So in the Buddhist sense of consciousness, this is another word that is very much in the minds of modern psychologists or psychiatrists or scientists. What is consciousness? And the Western science tends to see consciousness as contained within the human form, like it's in the brain or in the head, or it's within the body of an individual. So, but that creates a sense of separation, because if my consciousness is mine in my body, then your consciousness is, and that doesn't. There's no unity in that. There's still this idea of me and you as separate. And where the Buddhist approach to consciousness is unity. It's one. So I'm just suggesting now that you try to imagine or create this sense of consciousness is the same thing for all of us at this moment. It's not within individual bodies and outside the human form there's no consciousness. But these human forms are conscious forms, as well as, you can include the animal kingdom, the birds and the bees and the whole universe, because consciousness has no boundary. You can't really define it, but you can know it. Like each one of you here this evening knows that you're conscious. Don't you, I hope? The consciousness is what you know, but you can't define it. I say, well, what exactly is it? Tell me, and then you fumble around try to find words, but you wouldn't find the right words to describe it. But you can know it, and this knowing then is mindfulness. It's Sati Sampajanya, the ability to know the present moment. Consciousness, it has no limit, no boundary. So it has, it's what we recognize that is beyond just the separation of the physical bodies, the emotional feeling, emotional habits, the memories, the character tendencies, the fears and desires that we produce in our mind. The conditions arise and cease in consciousness. but the awareness, like with an emotion like anger, is a strong emotion. And we tend to say, you know, like people tell me, how do I deal with my anger? People say I'm an angry person, and what must I do to get rid of this anger? So this is how generally the ego operates. You claim that these states of mind are yours, and then you know, you're not being mindful. You're operating from a conception that you're an angry person, and that you shouldn't be. It's wrong to be angry, and what must you do to conquer this, or get rid of it, or increase your sense of more patience? What must I do? Where mindfulness isn't about judging it as personal. Anger is an emotion that arises and ceases in consciousness. And when we're mindful, then we're looking at anger as we experience it, no longer from the personal position of my problem, my anger, but the seeing that it is what it is. If this moment you feel this emotion, this is what you're feeling, and to know that, then you're developing this wisdom. You're cultivating awareness with wisdom, which in Buddhist terms means to see the impermanence of anger, because all conditioned phenomena, the body, the mind, the emotions, the sensory experiences, memories, everything is our, we call conditioned phenomena, are conditions. They're in Pali sankharas. They arise and cease. Like the body our human bodies are sankharas because they were born and they get old and die. So that's the nature of sankhara, is that they have no permanency. They're in this continuous process of change from birth to death, or from beginning to ending. So with Buddhist meditation, and then we're observing the changingness of conditions here, because sankharas work in the same way, whether they're emotional or memories or whatever, whatever they happen to be in the present. The thing that the wisdom recognizes, they're in the process of change. And like anger itself is, if you're aware of it and not following it or believing it or trying to suppress it, when you're accepting this strong emotion, then you're aware of it as changing, as that's what it's doing in the present. It's not permanent. And it's not you, really. It's not, you claim it as your problem, but it's not really. It is what it is. And through this, we begin to resolve and understand ourselves in a way that we can't when we're just trying to not become an angry person, or how to get rid of this bad feeling, or we might see ourselves as greedy, lustful, or confused, or jealous, or fear. We have a lot of fears and anxieties about life, about ourselves, about the future. And these are seen from the ego level, always interpreted as something wrong with either myself or the society, the world around me. And then we should try to fix it, so we should try to spend our lives trying to fix all the defects in the society. We're doing an attempt to impose political idealism, and democratic forms, trying to create utopian societies where everything's fair, everybody's equal, is freedom in every way, is an ideal. It's what should be in terms of ideals. But the way it is, it's not an ideal. Life isn't ideal. It is like this. It's what you're feeling now. It's like this. many of us have suffered a lot from idealism, because, like, being an American, you realize that the United States was created on ideals. It's an idealistic society. It sees itself always as at the forefront of democracy and freedom and human rights and all of the best that we can create in our minds. Where I lived in England for over 30 years, and there you have a different attitude, because it has a long history of change. It's not based on ideals, but on a kind of gradual evolution from tribal to feudal to monarchies to democracy and so forth. And so it doesn't really, the British don't tend to relate so idealistically to life. But we're very, like Americans, we're brought up with this idealism. Now what an ideal is you can think, you can create ideals of perfection. Just sitting here in this theater, you can imagine how things should be, how you should be if you were an ideal man or woman, an ideal partner, an ideal citizen, how Brazil should be as an ideal. We can all create, how we would like Brazil to be as an ideal. But ideals have no feeling. They're cold, heartless, taking thoughts. It's the thinking process that that's thinking in the best terms, in the superlative levels. And it can inspire us. Like, ideals are necessary, not to diminish them, but to know their limitation. Like, life itself is not an ideal. There's no ideal society, except in one's head, as you think of how things should be. But, so, I look at ideals as more like guiding stars, when you're traveling, when you're at sea. You have to, in the old days, you had to go by the stars, and you get the direction where to go in this vast ocean, Atlantic Ocean. You have to keep the direction through the stars above you, but you also have to pay attention to where you're at, the weather, the condition of the boat, and the crew of the ship, whether it's stormy or calm. We have to, survive, you can't just keep looking at the stars, otherwise, you fall off the cliff. You have to also, you need the direction of the ideal, but you also need to know where you're at. At this point, life is like this. And the cliff is here, and the dangerous things are over here, and you can maneuver your way without losing your direction. And so this is where we need this. We need the ideal as a guide, but not as an attachment. Because when we attach to the superlatives, to the best, we can only become critical and cynical and disappointed with ourselves, with our families, with our society, because it isn't ideal, and it never will be. And so we think how people should be, how a mother should be, a father should be, a wife, husband should be, how children should be, how the government should be. When we think about how it should be, then we become very resentful or cynical or bitter, because it's not like that. It's not the way it should be. So having an ideal is not like we're dismissing, but we're no longer attaching, because we're mindful, and we know where we are here in the present moment is like this. And as we examine the conditions we're experiencing with wisdom, we begin to see how we create suffering, wanting something that we don't have yet. Like the idea, I'm not good enough the way I am, now I need to practice meditation in order to become enlightened like the Buddha, is still the ego operating. The opposite is, I'm just as good as the Buddha. Those kind are impossible. But we started out, most of us start out feeling there's something wrong with me. I need to do something in order to become a better person, or become like the Buddha, or whatever, our ideal might be. But then the Buddha, instead of pointing to, external forces, the Buddha out there in the universe, the direction is here. So again, pointing to the heart, to the feeling. Life is about feeling. We're feeling creatures. We're emotional. And this realm we're living in is all about feeling. And yet we can create, when we have ideals about how things should be, we aren't feeling anything. Because ideals don't feel anything. But here we do feel things. And so the mindfulness is not belief in some kind of heart condition that we're looking at, but it's more directing our attention to what we're actually feeling in this present time is like this. Whether it's happy or sad or confused or doubtful. We go through so many changes on an emotional level because the conditions around us change. Now we call this awakening, and the word Buddha itself means awakened consciousness of an individual. So it's like, even though we're all conscious, we're not awake. We're operating from the conditioning process, how we've been programmed through our cultural conditioning, our social conditioning, religious conditioning. We're operating from the ego level, from our self-judgment, self-criticism, self-praise, or self-aversion. We see things in terms of, not of change, but of right and wrong, good or bad. And so we're caught, and this is all due to the thinking process. The ability to think is a blessing, but it's also a curse, because when we attach to thinking all the time, then we end up being critical or bitter or cynical, because the thinking process can take you so far, and then as you get older, you realize that what can you do to create the right conditions for Brazil to have this ideal democratic system? We begin to feel even more helpless. And also, if you're an American, you lose that sense of patriotism and belief in the system as you gain more knowledge of what's really going on. And as the American ideal is such, the realities are not like that. And so then you can become bitter and cynical and feel somehow you've been cheated or deluded by your education rather than reinforced wisdom. Where with Buddhist meditation, wisdom is not about how things should be, but the way things are. And so it's not saying, it's not how things should be. It takes the thinking process. We can imagine how you know, the society should be if it were perfect. We have the ideals, we have the vocabulary. But if we let go of the thinking process, not trying to deny thinking, but recognize the limitation that thinking is conditioned phenomena. It arises and ceases like anything else. And thinking is about dualism. If you've got heaven, you have to have hell along with it. If you've got good, bad is its opposite. And that's what thinking is. It divides everything into two things, male and female, right and wrong. And we have value judgments about if something's right, then we hold to that, and then we feel that anything doesn't fit into our view of what's right is wrong, and we can, you know, we go to war, we persecute each other, we abuse each other because our own sense of righteousness can be very limited, and we can feel that anyone who doesn't agree should be punished or persecuted in some way. With wisdom, then this is universal wisdom. It's not personal anymore. It's not like my wisdom, or I have wisdom, and it's available to all of us. It's our very nature. But even though it affects you now, we may not be awakened in that way because we operate from this dualistic thinking mind, the critical faculty, directed towards ourselves. You know, we're critical of ourselves, we're critical of people we live with, the government, everything. You can see something wrong with the universe. You see climate change and pollution and all these things that shouldn't be. And we can feel very threatened by the things that are beyond our control. So what can we do? We feel quite helpless. So this is why the interest in Buddhist meditation, or in meditation in general, because Buddhist meditation, mindfulness practices are quite, unnecessarily aligned with Buddhism. So in the United States, you've got a lot of teach mindfulness who avoid anything Buddhist because, and people have, if they find out it's Buddhist, they might not want to do it. So you call it stress reduction seminars. But what it amounts to is mindfulness, developing awareness, encouraging us to awaken, to be aware, and to learn to really investigate the reality of our consciousness. Now the Buddhist system, the Four Noble Truths, the first sermon, the first Noble Truth is just a statement: there is suffering. And suffering is an all-inclusive word. It includes everything from mild irritation to dis-ease, to traumas, to every possible form of suffering you can imagine. And the Pali word is dukkha, which means that which is unsatisfying or incomplete. And so the Buddha, when he met his 5 colleagues in Sarnath in India, they were wondering what he realized. He had this kind of luminous aura, radiance, what is, you left us, you left the ascetic life to go off by yourself, and they were at first quite critical of the ascetic Gautama when he left them, because they were very convinced that they were on the right path. But when they met the Buddha after his enlightenment, then they were aware that he was, there's something changed, and they wanted to know what it is. And the Buddha pointed to suffering, said there is suffering, there is this dukkha, and it should be understood. And so to understand something, to understand suffering, you look here. You're not trying to understand why other people suffer. We do that a lot. What's wrong with the society in which there's so much injustice or unfairness. But so we're already critical of that kind of suffering. But this suffering here, this sense of fear or anxiety or worry, common forms of mental states that haunt people in affluent societies. You live in your condo with nice, comfortable, guarded gates, with CCTV cameras, protect yourself from outside dangers. You can sit in your modern condo and feel anxious and worried about whatever you happen to be thinking at the time. So we look here and we begin to recognize this understanding. We're accepting it. We're not trying to blame it on somebody else. We're not trying to explain it, but just recognize this feeling of incompleteness, of separateness, of loneliness, of anxiety is like this. And so then it's a noble truth rather than a nasty fact of life. Because you're changing from someone who's just reacting to suffering, trying to get rid of it and find happiness, to someone who's actually changing their attitude towards suffering, to accept it, to notice it. And that leads to the second noble truth, which is that suffering has a cause. It's not permanent. It's not even personal. It arises due to conditions in which things change, and so much change is going on that we don't want, but change is the way conditioned phenomena operates. And so we're encouraged to look at suffering as change rather than as something wrong. And this desire, ignorance of Dhamma, ignorance of the ultimate reality, means that we have desires. We want pleasure to the senses, sensual desire. We want to have the pleasure of the sensory experience. We also have the desire to become something, to get something we don't have yet. Whether it's ambition to become rich or wealthy or powerful, or to become enlightened, or become something that we feel we're not, is another form of desire. And then the third form of desire is the desire to get rid of what we don't like. How can I get rid of anger? How can I get rid of fear and jealousy? How can I get rid of the jealousy? Is the desire to get rid of. And desire is something to look at. It's a condition that arises and ceases. And this mindfulness then is our ability to sustain awareness around desire. Desire comes and goes. But this awareness is interested in the fact that desire is present, and then if you're patient and you don't grasp it, it ceases. And so you're aware of the presence and absence. And this is what universal wisdom is. It's a discerning ability to sort out, to know reality from illusion. So that if you're training yourself within this way, you're actually informing consciousness with wisdom, universal wisdom, which is available to all of us. And we're seeing things from the way things actually are rather than from personal preferences, personal biases, cultural prejudices, and so forth that we tend to interpret life experience with if we're not awake, if we're not aware. So this leads to the third noble truth, which is the cessation of suffering. Conditions arise and cease. So that when we let things flow, when we no longer attach out of ignorance, out of habit, out of fear, then the changing conditions are what they are, and they all lead to their cessation, because that's where they're going. They arise and they cease. And this discerning ability to discern the absence of desire, absence of anger, absence of greed, absence of confusion or fear, it knows that the absence of something is like this. And that's peace. That's what peace really is. It's no longer just an ideal of wanting to stop fighting and wars, but you're aware of what peace really is, the reality of peace within yourself, within your mind, within consciousness. You find an inner peace that isn't going to be taken away from you by the outer turmoils that we encounter in daily life. And from this then we have the insight, we have the right understanding to cultivate this peaceful way into our daily lives. So in terms of like the Buddhist monks here, our involvement in Buddhist monasticism, it could be just because we're strange people. or you know, it's the cultivation of this path is the purpose. The form we have is created deliberately to help make this possible. So we learn how to live within a structure but not be attached to it, and develop these wisdom faculties, through this continuous awareness of and recognition of the citta, or the mind, or the consciousness itself. So there's time now to open the situation towards any questions that you might be having at this time.
Se alguém quiser fazer pergunta, pode ficar à vontade, levantar a mão e falar. Para quem não ouviu, a pergunta é se esse treinamento é uma coisa que vem com o tempo, uma coisa que ela tem dificuldade, se isso começa a dar resultados com o tempo, se é uma coisa que leva tempo a ser desenvolvido.
Well, it's don't worry about that. Just do it. You know, wanting results, wanting guarantee of results is another form of desire. You know, we just finished giving a 9-day retreat in a Benedictine monastery, and the whole point of this retreat was to provide a venue for encouraging people to develop this. It's a matter of confidence, learning to trust your awareness. That is most important. Not trying to get something, but just to have more confidence in being just aware of what you're actually feeling, and letting go of the feeling. Not letting go is not repression. It's not like denial or trying to destroy it, but let it be what it is. So it takes patience. We have to develop patience, and then wisdom can inform us. So I encourage you to just go for it without thinking about how long will it take.
Eu tenho um desejo de me tornar um monge. E eu acredito que eu preciso melhorar o meu conhecimento e a prática do Dharma. O que eu posso fazer para tomar esse caminho? Qual é o primeiro passo que eu posso tomar?
Uma pergunta que eu não vi, então uma pessoa que perguntou se uma pessoa que tem interesse em tornar-se monge, né, para aprofundar a prática do Dharma, qual é o primeiro passo, qual seria o caminho para seguir?
Well, just to recognize that there's an interest in it and of course, opportunities. There's more opportunities now than say when I became a monk. I didn't know what I was getting into when I ordained as a monk in Thailand, and there were no teachers of meditation and speaking English. I had to learn Thai language and so forth. So, but something in me had this confidence and trust in, you know, enough interest in Buddha Dhamma, in Buddha's teaching, to make a commitment. And of course, Thailand was a very nice country. You know, it was a nice place to live, and then it does have some very good teachers there. But we've established places in European countries, in North America. There's much more. In Portugal now, where Ajahn Dhammiko is living in a new branch monastery not far from Lisbon. When the Buddha before he died, before he passed away, the disciple said, "How are we going to get along? How will we practice without our teacher?" And the Buddha said, "I leave you the Dhamma, which is the teaching, the Dhamma teaching of the Buddha, and the Vinaya, the discipline of the monastic form." So that he used these two terms, Dhamma and Vinaya. And the Vinaya is a traditional monastic form that we hold that the Buddha actually established it. So what Vinaya is, it's a form that we agree to. Like we in Buddhist monasticism, we're all different characters, different nationalities, and so forth. So we submit to this common form when we become Buddhist monks. And that holds us together in spite of maybe personal with, you know, personal likes or dislikes or views about things. We can disagree on what we think of practices or what the Buddha taught, but on the whole, the structure holds a group of individuals together, and so our practice is very much, you know, in Sangha life, rather than me doing it exactly my way and at the expense of everyone else. So there's a wisdom there in the traditional form of Buddhism, as I've experienced it in Thailand. But now, like in Britain, for example, there's variations on the theme all over. You know, there's British Buddhism, there's psychotherapy Buddhism, there's Mahayana, there's Tibetan, there's so many different styles, different teachers, that it can be very confusing, you know, for us if you don't know what you're doing, because each one feels there is the best way. But when you choose a particular teacher or tradition, then it's to kind of just trust that, to work within that structure, and not to, you know, it helps you to sustain relationships in monastic forms that eventually you begin to appreciate, you know, and respect, and you see how it holds you together. The thing with modern life now is that all the boundaries, the moral boundaries, the things that held families together, marriages together, they're no longer there, you know, so each one, you know, expresses a sense of individualism and individual rights and so forth, so that there's no structure, it's just for yourself alone. And where, say, in this particular tradition, it's an ancient tradition, but we hold to the structure because we're not going to quibble about the structure, but learn how to submit to it, to observe our own feeling and karmic habits, and free ourselves from this blind attachment to conditions that we create.
Vai ter que traduzir para algumas pessoas.
O senhor recomendaria uma prática para as pessoas que estão aqui, que não conhecem meditação? Que tipo de prática seria a recomendada para pessoas que não foram no retiro, não sabem fazer?
A pergunta é, que prática eu recomendaria para uma pessoa que não tem a experiência de meditação, não frequenta retiros, uma prática para as pessoas que não têm esse tipo de experiência, eu recomendaria?
Well, here in Sao Paulo, you're on Casa de Dhamma. Hopefully someday Ajahn Mudito will return to live in Brazil. And then there are lay teachers who have insight and knowledge into the practice. But it's good to align yourself with something like a group like Kasanadama too, because it, you know, in some ways you're supporting each other. Because as a lone entity, it's very difficult. I tried, before I became a monk, trying to teach myself meditation, and I couldn't do it. You know, I just was driving myself crazy, and just trying to figure out what to do, and then the mind obsessed with thoughts that I was trying to suppress, and where a teacher can help us through, you know, point out what we're doing. Where sometimes as an independent person, we have no perspective on it. And then I found there's the suttas, the scriptural teachings of the suttas are very helpful. That's where the Dhammacakka Sutta, and there are books, you know, that are, you know, a lot of literature now, and in Portuguese language, scriptures have been translated into Portuguese as well as English. And there's internet, there's all kinds of Dhamma sites. So there's, in many ways, the information is out, you know, internationally. But we still, you know, we're social beings. We need encouragement. We might, you know, get kind of inspired to practice meditation, and then become negative about it and feel we can't do it and get it out. Where if we're with a group, there's much more holiness directing our attention, and when we do go through periods of despair or disillusionment, these are important mental states to observe, and it's through support of Dhamma friends that we can sometimes bear with these negative feelings till we see through them.
Can I do
Yes.
I have actually 3 questions, and the first is, nowadays, how often do you have bad feelings, and how long do they last? And how do you handle these unpleasant feelings? And do they still occur often to you?
Para quem não ouviu, então a pergunta dela, são 3 perguntas, quão frequentemente ele hoje em dia ainda tem sentimentos ruins, quanto tempo eles duram e como ele lida com isso.
We're getting personal. Well, a long time since I've been angry. But because you find a level of equanimity that becomes very clear, very strong. And this I've developed over many years, this internal silence, and the tendencies to get caught up into emotions. I mean, I still, in conditions of somebody insults me or something, I can feel anger, but I know better than to grasp it or to deny it. So it just, the conditions arise, you still have these emotions, but you're aware of them with the wisdom faculty rather than just, trying to get rid of it or believe in it and follow it. And then, like consciousness itself, pure consciousness is equanimous. It's your true nature. It's just, we don't notice it. So we, and then the ego, and somebody says something you don't like, or insults you, or what you feel, the conditions for being angry or enraged arise. Or I noticed, like, when my mother died, this was about 30 years ago, I was, your mother's the most important person, and you only have one. And she was 88 years old, so on an intellectual level, I was prepared for her to die. It was on the level of she's old and she's not going to be around much longer. So you were kind of prepared for that. But when it actually happened, when I heard that she died, then I felt grief, which I didn't try to dispel away with thinking about it, but I accepted the feeling of loss was like this. So I didn't consider it suffering. I consider it just the normal response of a human being to say loss of a loved one is like this. Where on the thinking level, I know if I really mindful, I wouldn't even have any grief. I wouldn't, all conditions arise in seats, your mother's dead. It's what's supposed to happen. It's not cold-blooded. You don't become cold-blooded, rational kind of robot or zombie. You feel, but the feelings are seen from a wisdom level rather than from a personal one or ego level.
Sorry about my wedding. What kind of problems you had? What kind of difficulties you had when you decided to be a monk at Thailand?
Estou perguntando sobre quais foram as dificuldades, quais foram os problemas que ele enfrentou quando ele decidiu tornar-se um monge na Tailândia.
Well, I mean, this was 1966, and I'm from, I've been living in Berkeley, California. I was a student there at university, graduate student, and in the 60s, like Berkeley was, it's all boundaries. Just the drug scene was beginning, and free love, and follow your heart, and all these kind of options. Making life. We didn't have a lot of moral judgments or anything to deal with. It's all just do what you feel like. And but I found out doing what I felt like wasn't always very wise. And I became very confused, emotionally very confused at the time. And that's one reason why I joined the Peace Corps, to get away from that. And also to go to Asia, because I did have a kind of longing for some, I wanted my life to be significant, not just wasted in the way I was doing as a student, graduate student. So then I find myself living in most strict monastery in Thailand, where monastic rules are, there's hundreds of them. And they deal with all kinds of things, from big things, big, severe, heavy conditions to just forms of etiquette and sensitivity in social life and in monastic life. And I knew I needed that kind of training. I kind of intuitively knew I actually needed to learn how to submit to a teacher, learn how to obey, learn how to conform, because my previous life had been, I considered myself a non-conformist. I considered myself a liberated soul, wasn't bound by rules and conventions, and I saw myself as a non-conformist. It was kind of a conceit I had at the time, and here's something, I was in the most conforming situation you can imagine. And then Luang Por Ajahn Chah was even more strict than most monasteries. You see, so I had to learn, the first month I was with Luang Por Chah, there were 2 Thai monks who could translate, who could speak English, but they didn't stay, they left. And then I had to learn Thai and the dialect, because they spoke a dialect of the Lao language where I lived. And so, it was very confusing in many ways. Learning to conform, to put yourself in a situation where the culture is very different, the language is different, the food is different, the climate is different, and we don't have anybody to complain to or talk to. I wonder why I stayed. But I did have a lot of faith in Ajahn Chah, actually. And this is more intuitive, because, he wasn't that well known yet in Thailand. And he was just well known in the northeast part of Thailand. But on a personal level, I kind of trusted him. And I liked the form he had, the place itself. I quite liked. It was a forest monastery. It was very primitive then. There was no electricity. It was very, very ordered, and you had to fit within the structures. Otherwise, the other monks were on your back all the time. So I learned how to conform, but the conformity wasn't just out of fear, or the Luang Por Chah's approach was always encouraged me to observe what I actually felt. The feeling of confusion, the impatience, the conceit I had about, my own self, being the only American Western monk in the monastery. Every culture has its conceits, and Americans have a certain kind of conceit, and then you're living in a totally different, third world environment. Then I was brought up in city life, in more sophisticated circumstances, and then I found myself in rice growing communities and peasant life, and that would bring up feelings of conceit and superiority. But then Luang Por Chah would get me to observe that, to see these as something to not be attached to. So more and more you're releasing yourself from your cultural biases, your own personal take on everything, and my attachment to the thinking process, always trying to figure everything out and form judgments about other monks or Thai tradition or Thai culture or whatever. So eventually you have insight into just the peacefulness. Within a few years I was very used to and loved the lifestyle of the Thai monastery. That's not very long, right? But the first year, when I look back, people say, both in England and in Thailand, they say, you must have really suffered. That first year must have really been difficult for you, But now I look back, and I just remember that first year as a wonderful year. And I know I suffered, but it wasn't suffering from, it was just my own creations. It was me that was making me suffer, because actually the situation was very good. With Ajahn Chah, the monks I lived with, the lay people were incredibly kind and generous. And so I wasn't feeling persecuted or diminished from outside. So that kind of suffering I didn't receive, but the suffering I created, I don't remember it. It's like, and yet I know that I did, but it doesn't hold in terms of memory. Where usually suffering imposed from outside, you remember.
Por que o conceito de anatta, de não self, é tão difícil de entender? Às vezes eu acho que eu entendo, depois eu não entendo, depois eu entendo.
Por que o conceito de anatta, que é a ausência de um eu, é tão difícil de entender? Às vezes ele entende, às vezes não entende.
Well, that's, when you try to think of it, you just get confused. The thinking process is based on, I am this body, I am this, these feelings are mine, I'm this personality. And so you can't resolve the issue of anatta without it sounding like, like a kind of suicide or annihilation, because that's the way the thinking process works. It can take you so far, but as you trust your awareness more, sati sampajanya, then the self you create with thinking dissolves. It doesn't seem real anymore. And it's more like this awareness is what you really are, but it's not personal. It's not attached to your physical body or your moods or feelings anymore. But it's certainly intelligent, universal. It's the same for all of us. But it's beyond definition. You can't define anatta, but you can know it. It's one of those knowns through awareness, not through definition. Ajahn Chah used to say, when you try to figure out anatta, your mind goes crazy. It just doesn't make sense in terms of the thinking mind. Well, it's getting late, and you obviously have answered all your questions. And this evening, I just encourage you in this direction, because it gives you a balance to this world you have to live in as a human individual. And and it's like fulfilling yourself as a human being. That's what I feel. I fulfill my life as a human being. It's something that is available to us. It's not like something that only very special human beings can do. You have to be born into a special situation. The teaching is based on something so ordinary like suffering that we can all relate to. It's not high up that only very refined conscious beings can recognize, but it's that level of just ordinariness that we can all, and the Buddha, out of compassion, placed his emphasis on this because it's something that all human beings can recognize. And where, say, especially refined meditations, we can refine conscious conditions to, through special techniques. But they all end up as impermanent anyway. So the Buddha takes this sense of dis-ease, unhappiness, or sadness, or loneliness, makes it into a noble truth. And this is, it's not a pessimistic, it's not a doctrinal approach. This is encouraging us to use something ordinary to investigate our conscious reality. And so this is available to us, and right now there's so much available opportunities. Say, 50 years ago there were very few, even to find books on Buddhism in English was not easy. Now you go to a bookshop in London and you have option paralysis. Which book should I read? 50 years ago, if you saw any book on Buddhism, you grabbed it, because they're hard to find. So I wish you all the best, and hope that this evening has encouraged you towards awakening, towards wisdom.